Hello and welcome back to another episode of Purpose Through Fitness, a community designed to encourage you to live a more positive, happy, and healthy lifestyle. We are going to uncover secrets of the body, the mind, and the spirit to help put you in the best position possible to live a more purposeful life. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of A Purpose Through Fitness. I'm very honored to present my next guest on this show, Mario Folino. From designing creative ways to work out to teaching basic survival skills, Mario is one of the most unique and kind individuals I know. In fact, his Instagram channel is one of my personal favorites to follow. Mario, thank you so much for being on my show today. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited.
It's my pleasure, my friend. So let's go ahead and get right into this here. I want you to let my listeners know a little bit more about yourself. What is your background? How did you get into fitness? And let them into your world a little bit.
All right. I definitely come from a unique situation, I guess I could say. I'm from the Midwest. I live in a fairly rural part of the Midwest. So as a kid, I kind of grew up in the backwoods, like outside quite a bit. And as I got older, there was some family troubles is probably what I'll leave it at with my parents. So I spent a lot of time at home, a lot of time by myself, and I just spent more and more time outside and just playing around. And then as I got older, I had gone to school and never did too great in school, never really liked it too much. Just couldn't seem to really fit in or anything like that. As time went on towards early middle school, I had, and this kind of gets into how I got into fitness. I remember going to CVS with my mom, and I don't know if you remember these, Kevin. They don't really make them anymore. They were the muscle mags, is what they were called. It was kind of these crazy magazines when weightlifting really, in my opinion, started to take off in the public eye, like when all the new supplements were coming out and C4 and stuff. And I remember seeing those magazines, and eventually I just saved up some money and bought some. And I just thought it was really cool what they were doing. It was very, I just like the idea of being in control of what you want to do and setting your goals and stuff. So I had bought a few of those, and little did I realize at the time what a gym membership cost and what it cost to get into all of that. So I started to pair my interest in the outdoors with my interest in fitness, because I was like, well, if I can't go to a gym, and this time I was so young and my parents were not available to take me to that and stuff. And I did have school sports and things like that, but that was usually pretty structured. And at that age, they don't really let you use the weight room. So I'd come home and I would just use what I had. And generally what I had was either scrap metal, wood, or just random things that I found in our garage, and a lot of pull-ups and push-ups and logs and a lot of, a lot of bruises, a lot of trial and error, figuring out what I could and couldn't do. So that passion, as time grew, I would go to commercial gyms and stuff and learn more, and I still really enjoyed it. And it became something that really kind of my solace, I guess, or what I really was interested in, because again, I just never really seemed to do better in school as time went on, but I did see the growth in fitness quite a bit, and I enjoyed the challenge, and I enjoyed what it offered me, that escape from the current reality of my situation at the time. So I just kind of grew up with that, and as I got older, I would go off and I moved out west to Washington when I was 17 years old, and I credit the courage to do that a lot to fitness, actually, because to move 2,000 miles away from home with like $200 in my wallet at 17 years old, it took a lot. It was a pretty wild ride for a few years till I got established, so to say. I guess never as established as probably what most people would consider established, but enough that I was not living in my car anymore or anything like that. And I trace a lot of the ability to think for myself and and push through challenges and control my own emotions to those early years of fitness, where as a kid, I just looked around. I was like, all right, well, this is what I have right now, and let's see what I can do with it.
Wow, that's awesome there. And that's, you kind of touched on a really good spot there is, a lot of people look at fitness as just from a health standpoint, thinking that, if I work out, I'm going to get physically healthy, but there's just so many life lessons from enduring some kind of pain or pushing yourself through that physical stress really does a lot for emotional and mental development as well. I think it's really interesting that you took that big leap out to Washington at such a young age like that. That really shows some deep resolve there. One thing I'd like to actually ask you, what really inspired you to move out to Washington? Was it just a whim decision, or was it a buildup of things over time?
I guess I could give you two different answers for it. One's more deep, and one is kind of straight to the point. I guess the straight to the point is the reason I ended up in Washington specifically is I literally could not get any farther away from Illinois. I literally hit the ocean in Seattle. I wanted to get as far away as I physically could. So I guess that's why Washington. But the reason for my leaving was just more as I grew up, I didn't necessarily do well in school, didn't get along with most people here. I thought and I acted differently than a lot of people growing up in a rural Midwestern town. Having parents that are a little bit known for the things that had gone on for when I was younger, and then kind of being a long-haired, hippie, outdoor kid, I just really did not feel that I belonged here. So I'd always been looking for a way out. And my grandparents were very invested in me seeking some sort of education after high school. And I knew at the time that I wasn't ready for college. I knew I wasn't going to take out a bunch of loans to what realistically would have just been flunking out. So I kind of struck a deal with my grandparents, because my grandpa grew up his whole life working really hard, was in the elevator union, and I was always really close to him, so I knew it meant a lot if I went and pursued some sort of education out of school. So once I decided I was going to get out of Illinois, I kind of cut a deal with my grandparents that I would go to an outdoor school in Washington that was not necessarily a college course, but it would set me up for a job with the National Park Service and stuff like that, being a guide or a backwoodsman. So that is why I actually ended up specifically in that part of Washington. But also I had known that Washington, Oregon area was going to be a really unique place for me to go. It's kind of I grew up hearing about the West and how different it was, and whether you had Seattle and the fast pace of Seattle or the wide expanse of the Rocky Mountains as compared to growing up pretty much literally in the center of a cornfield. It was something I just had to experience. So going out West was just, to me, was to cut my teeth on reality, I guess. I always knew that I was meant to do something else, but I felt like I could not do what that was in my current place.
I love that. And, it's funny that you bring up about moving out there, because, I've heard from a lot of people before. And one of my favorite things is, you can't choose where you're born, but you can choose where you live. And I've talked with so many people. I grew up in a small town in upstate New York, and a lot of friends and family still live up that way. And a lot of them always tell me, well, these are where our roots are, so we have to stay here. And I just never thought that way. My thought was always, how do you know that's where you're supposed to be unless you experience other stuff? So that's what brought me down to South Florida. And it was one of the best decisions, although the reason for coming down to Florida probably wasn't the best for me, but looking back on it, it was a good decision for me. Now, during this time when you were so young, moving out to Washington, who or what were you drawing inspiration from? Did you have any personal heroes that you looked up to, or anybody in the family that you looked up to that you really helped you push through the tough days?
I wouldn't exactly say anyone in the family. I was always close to my grandparents, and my relationship with my parents was worked on throughout the time that I went out west. But while I always loved them, there wasn't necessarily a life that I wanted to emulate. I would say realistically, my inspiration was a mix of two things. One, of stories that I had heard of people going. I'd always been really interested in like the people who had gone out 200 years ago to go find gold or go like stake their claim out west because they just weren't happy with where they were. And I always resonated with that a little bit. I was like, well, you know, I want to go out west. I want to be something. I didn't know exactly what at the time, but I just knew I wanted to be something. So I was like, always resonated with that old west outlaw mentality, I guess. And then also just, I guess, the idea that I wanted to be different than what I had grown up around. I did not really, and I don't want to sound like I'm trashing anyone or anything like that. That's not at all what I'm trying to get at. But the idea of just like buying a townhome in Illinois and having like the normal life, I guess you could say, that I was growing up in high school that everyone had, you know, I wanted the exact opposite of that. I didn't know exactly what it was, but I knew how much I didn't like that. So I figured realistically anything outside of that will be better. So that's kind of what that was my drive. I guess I was emulating the opposite of what I had seen and didn't like, which I'm sorry if that's not a great answer to that question. It's a little hard to explain. I still have trouble kind of thinking, even to myself, like explaining to myself how I thought at the time, but I kind of know what I was getting at.
Yeah, no, I think that explains it quite aptly, because that to me sounds like you were wise beyond your years. And I'm first going to make a little disclaimer here for anybody that does listen to this. I am not going to come out and say that I think school is bad, but to that same point, I do not believe that schooling, especially outside of, you know, middle school, high school, I do not believe it is for everyone. You know, some people thrive in that situation. You know, if you're going to become a doctor and you need your PhD or master's and that's the path you want to take, great. But I think there's such a negative thought process around people who don't go on to continued education. And to me, the world we live in nowadays offers so much possibility for all of us out there. I mean, the internet, you can do basket weaving videos and you're going to find a group of people who love watching what you do. So I think it's pretty incredible that you had this this almost heightened sense of awareness at such a young age that you were being called or pulled to do something different, because that's something that I only feel up until recently I'm starting to get that sense myself. And there's many people who go their entire lives that never experience that or never really figure out who they truly are. So I think you explained that quite well. And I think that's something you should be very proud of, because at such a young age to recognize that, I think shows you are wise beyond your years.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
So another thing I want to get into here from the fitness aspect, I know how you kind of got started into fitness with those magazines. Let's go over some of these early bruises and trials that you went through of mixing fitness with the outdoors. I'd love to hear some good experiences and some bad experiences along the way.
Okay, I think I'll start with the bad experiences because they're a bit funnier. First, I learned probably the key of outdoor fitness is the ground is when you go to a gym and you lift up a weight, you're on a fairly rubberized, like straight leveled floor. Like that is something I think a lot of people take for granted if they've never lifted outside of a gym. And foot placement and a strong base was something that I learned very early on, because there's always, no matter how flat you think your grass is, there's a divot, there's a hill, there's something. Like you have to be thinking with your feet. And a lot of my videos, you actually see I'm not wearing shoes. And I get a lot of slack for that. People are like, you're going to break your foot. And I'm tossing around anvils and stuff with no shoes on. And I found that actually, like, you have to think with your feet. Because I actually did break I broke pretty much all of my toes and my foot about several times. But that was when I was wearing shoes. And so I started I learned that you gotta think with your feet first and be planted on the ground. Cause I remember I got my first weight set when I was probably 13 or 14 years old. And the first thing I did was I put all of the weights on it that it came with. And I went out into the middle of my yard and I tried to do a clean and jerk with it. And not only did I not realize that the ground I was standing on was uneven, but I was about 2 inches away from a hole. And I just wrecked myself. I mean, it came down, it whacked me in the head, landed on my leg, landed on my foot. And I was beat up. It took me like 2 or 3 weeks before I would even come outside again after that. Like, I really had to recover from that one. And it's funny looking back. At the time, it was like, oh no. But, and also one of the experiences I think I learned the most too was you have to be actively prepared for anything. Like, one thing I've learned about working with weights, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of those videos of like eye hooks and carabiners and stuff. Mm-hmm. You have to be sure of the wood you're working with, of your materials, and you have to be kind of feeling it through your hands a little bit, because when I would go out and I would just be like, head down, let's do this. I would go out, I would press a log over my head, the log would break and I would get hit in the head with a piece of it or something like that. Or I try to attach weights to something like a stick that wasn't, like, either there was a knot in the grain or something like that, or it was just too dry or too wet. And I would go out and, like, luckily I never impaled myself, but I would get cut up pretty good from some sticks that would snap and whack me in the face and stuff. So I had quite a few black eyes or cuts and broken toes for the probably the first year and a half I was doing it. I really, really got beat up. But as time went on, I learned to slow down and start thinking from the bottom up, I guess, from my feet to the tip of my head. And it forced me to learn more about the outdoors, because I had to learn about what trees I was working. Because originally I would just grab a stick, I wouldn't think too much about it. Now I was like, all right, well, now I need a piece of straight grain maple and I need to dry it for this amount of time so it doesn't splinter and whack me in the face. And it was nice because I got to build my outdoor knowledge as well as my fitness knowledge. So I guess the bad experiences turned into good experiences.
I love that. And one thing that I think just, it's absolutely drawn me in with you from the very beginning is kind of the no excuses mentality. I've worked with many clients before who have, they've told me, well, I either can't afford a gym membership, or, I don't have the time to drive all the way to a gym, do my workouts, this, that, and the other thing. And they don't realize that you can just take average everyday household items or go in your backyard with a few sticks and things, and you can actually get in any type of workout that you need done. And it's something pretty impressive to see with you, because I'm not very good with my hands. I'll be the first to admit that. I can't fix anything. I can't build anything. So seeing what you're able to create, I think, is absolutely inspirational. And I'm curious, that passion for outdoors, did that come from when you were very, very young in Illinois?
I think it came from two separate things. The first is conceptual learning, and I think that ties into fitness as well. Because I never did well at school, I had to, from a very, very, very young age, watching everything go down with my parents, I kind of turned in on myself a little bit, in the sense that I was I guess probably it got, eventually over time it developed into a problem, but overanalyzed everything around me. I had to think about myself and what was going on. And I realized that the repetition method of things never really stuck with me, because at a young age I had to understand things that were a little bit beyond what a child would need to understand. So I had to understand the concepts and kind of work out my own ideas from there, and I would watch those ideas play out. So in the outdoors, I could pretty much do something similar, where obviously there are things you just need to know over time, like poisonous plants or venomous or toxic things. But going out into nature, I think once you understand how nature works, your opportunities for growing in intelligence, or your natural intelligence, they just go on forever. Once you understand how the soil affects the trees that are growing, and how the trees affect the soil that they're growing in, and how the 4 seasons, how the different plant cycles work, and how the seeding works, and how those animals interact, whether it's with the soil, with the trees, with the plants. You start to understand, like, okay, well, if I understand, for example, this was something we did quite a bit in our in my certification program for outdoor education, but it's something I had done for a long time before that. They would take us somewhere that we had never been. When I was in Washington, usually that was somewhere on the east side of the Cascades. And obviously on the east side of the Cascades, if you've ever been to Washington, there's a lot of different natural gradients, and just any mountain really, but specifically in that area. They would drop us off somewhere and they'd be like, okay, tell us what kind of animals we could find here, or what kind of soil type, or what kind of trees. And all you'd have to work with is the things around you. So if you got dropped off in the middle of the day, you're not going to see what animals are there, most likely, obviously, besides some smaller birds or mammals possibly. But you would take like one thing you knew. Okay, this is quartz rock, so I know that this soil has good drainage, and therefore I picked up the soil and I could smell it. It's like, all right, well, it's very alkaline, so I can tell you acidic, so I could tell you this is probably a pine dominated or evergreen dominated ecosystem. All right, well, if it's evergreen dominated ecosystem, I can assume there's large mammals, and I can also assume there's probably squirrels as well, and I can assume that it's cold here for a good portion, if not the whole year. And then you just build from there. And I think that type of thinking really drew me into the outdoors, as well as drawing me into fitness.
Interesting, man. I'm learning some new stuff on that as well. You actually touched on something that I just recently kind of found out about, because as I'm going as well, learning about different things, I always thought, which actually we're gonna talk about your diet here in a second. I'm curious on how someone like you goes about with your diet and nutrition. But I had always thought, get your healthy doses of fruits and vegetables. Keep your meats lean and clean. But I'm starting to learn about fruits and vegetables being in season. And, just because you're eating the same veggies and fruit year round doesn't mean it's necessarily the best for you. For instance, if broccoli's not in season, then you're not getting all the benefits that you would if it was in season. So that's something I'm just recently getting into. But that leads me into the next one with you. What kind of diet and nutrition plan do you follow that you found most effective for what you do?
I guess the best way to put that is, for me, I've learned first, before I decide what my nutrition is going to be, I have to decide what my circumstances are. So if I am when I'm in school, for example, I'm generally, I almost always have 2 different jobs. So I'm always working a lot, but adding school onto that usually means that I'm in a very intense period of my life. So I'm 16 hours a day and 8 hours of sleep, and then training. So at that time, I look towards more fat or hearty foods. So I might switch out some, I'm trying to think of a good example, some almonds with some walnuts, or I might just double up on my almonds if I don't have walnuts, for example. Or I look for foods that have more energy in them. So I might add more cheese and milk and red meat in my diet. And I might bring down the amount. Like I might go from a 93.7 lean ground beef to a 80-20 ground beef. So I look for more fat-based foods if I have more energy, more need for energy, I should say. So I look at my circumstances first, and I usually evolve my diet around that. So, for example, the last 2 months over quarantine, excluding the time I was recovering from my surgery, where I was just eating as much as I could whenever. It was summer, it was warm, I was outside, I was training, but I wasn't really doing much. I couldn't work I had a 1 month period I couldn't work because they didn't want to risk me getting sick after my surgery. So I was outside, it was warm out. I didn't really need a lot of energy, so I really upped the leanness of the meat I was eating. Some of my beef I switched out for chicken. I eventually brought like my whole milk to skim, or just And then at a certain point, I had cut out milk completely, and I was drinking water, and I was eating a lot of the herbs that grow, or in the plants that grow in our yard or in our garden. Mm-hmm. So it more moved to like a vegetable, meat, water situation as compared to the winter, where it might be heavy in the dairies and heavy in the fatty nuts and heavy in the fattier meats. So my nutrition is usually based around what I'm doing at the time. I try not to base what I'm doing around my nutrition, because I just, in my life, with how much I have going on, that's usually not something I'm able to do. I hope that, I'm sorry if that's not a super clear answer, but it varies quite a bit from season to season and season in my life as well.
No, I like that. And thank you for sharing that. I like how you base it on your circumstances there. I think that's pretty cool and kind of unique. You know, a lot of people jump into all these different type of fad diets, and, you know, they don't necessarily do it based on their circumstances and take into consideration things like that. They just, you know, eat to try and lose weight, probably do it the wrong way, and they just keep jumping back and forth, which actually brings me back to, I know we spoke yesterday briefly about the post you had about the body fat percentage, and that's actually something I'd like to talk about here. You know, I feel like when you get into the fitness world, a lot of times it's, you know, you've got to have the most defined muscles, the six-pack abs, and your body fat percentage needs to be between 1% and 2%. And, you know, I'll be honest, I was guilty of that for quite some time, especially during the readiness trials. That was my primary focus, was trying to lose as much body fat percentage as I possibly could. And the more I started thinking about what my long-term goals were, you know, as far as doing ultra endurance races, ultra marathons, you know, even considering doing Ironman competitions down the road, it made me realize that you need that extra body fat percentage, because if you're really going to push your body the way you need to, that survival mode, it needs that fat in order to feed off of for energy. So if you have, you know, 1% body fat, you know, great, you might look aesthetically pleasing, but if you get stuck into a scenario where you need to survive without food for a little bit, or you need that extra energy, your body's not going to be able to produce it. So I'd like for you to touch base a little bit more on that, as far as, you know, what you said, your goals as far as body fat percentage, and what your current goals are as far as fitness goes.
Absolutely. And to touch on what you just said, it's actually really interesting to tie this in again. What you said about your survival needs, and if you look at animals throughout the year and how animals lose and gain weight based on the season and what their needs are and how much they need to do, like, you know, in the winter, and what you're doing with like marathons and endurance racing, which is incredible, by the way, just so impressive to me. You need that, like, I mean, you're really going into a survival state at that point, and our bodies have an interesting response to survival states that a lot of people don't realize with these diets that they try, is your body will regulate how much body fat it wants, whether you like it or not. Your body will start producing a ton of cortisol if it does not feel like it is holding the right amount of fat and energy for its current needs. So if you're super stressed out and you're trying to do this diet and it's not matching with your lifestyle, your body will actually hold more fat than if you were probably eating in excess of what you need a day, because your body is going to go into that survival mode and say, like, the subconscious part of your brain is going to outpower the conscious part of your brain. And if you're not aware, and what I had touched on in that post, I was like, you need to understand how outside of factors affect your body, because your body in its truest sense is meant to survive. And if it feels like you are not properly doing that, it will take over from your conscious brain and go into the subconscious. And that's where I think a lot of people get super stressed out on these diets, and it's usually just a spiral, and I feel so bad for them. And it's, you know, it's that proper education about how your body works and how our body is meant to exist. But Yeah. So, my current goals right now, I had 2 surgeries this year, one in October and then one in March. One for my shoulder, which had just had issues for a long time that took out a bunch of bone and scar tissue. And then 2 holes I had in my abdomen from an accident in one of my strongman competitions back in April of last year. So I mostly this whole year was just focused on existing. I wasn't really too worried about, I was trying to not gain too much weight in the sense that like I was already kind of heavy because I was deep in strongman.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't want to really cross that like 20% body fat threshold because I just didn't feel like I needed to, but I was eating within like what I felt necessary. And a lot of the medication I had and stuff was affecting my appetite. So it was kind of touch and go. And after my shoulder surgery, you'd probably seen that 6-month period where I was working out with like one arm.
Mm-hmm.
So I had adjusted. My goal at that point was just to kind of trim down a little bit. I didn't need as much of that body fat. I was just kind of holding it because I was a little upset about my circumstances, you know? So I was like, all right, I need to fix this. I want to get out and do something for no other reason than just to prove to myself, like, all right, like you're okay. This isn't the end of the world. And then I had my surgery in March, and that mentality kind of carried over. March, my goal was, again, just to heal. So I was giving my body ample food, ample rest, ample water. If it was a little more than I needed, that's fine. I would rather have more than less when it comes to recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And now that I'm out of that, I want to, again, trim down just a little bit. It's summer. I don't have a ton going on. It's not super cold or anything like that. So I more switched up my diet again to lean meats, a lot of vegetables, some nuts and berries. And that's pretty much what I'm eating right now. So the body fat's just kind of coming off as it does. I don't necessarily have a specific goal for my body fat. I would like to have a full 6-pack again, just honestly, just because I haven't had one in a while and I just want to do that. I wish I could give you a better reason besides that, but that's really sometimes I just like to do things to see if I can and just feel lean and healthy again and really just let my body, now that the hardest part of recovery is over, where the actual like building of scar tissue and the breaking down of scar tissue and finding that balance, I think, is relatively coming to its end. I really just kind of want to get healthy again, where I'm no longer basing what I'm doing off of being post-op 9 weeks or post-op 6 weeks or whatever I was at the time. I just wanted, this is what I did today. And that's always a good mentality to have. But I think for someone like me, I tend to go a little farther with most things than I need to. So that was something I implemented to keep myself in check, where it's like, okay, today I did this because I'm post-op 2 months. So it's not something, if I was healthy, yes, it would be different, but I need to understand the circumstances I'm in, and I don't get frustrated and try to push myself a little too far. But now that those shackles are coming off a little bit, I'm really kind of just excited to take my body for a test drive and see what I can do. So I think that's my goals right now, while also being smart about the things I'm doing, focusing a lot more on my movement and how my body is processing different stimuli and things like that. So I'd say that's my goal right now. Again, I would like the body fat to come off, but it seems like my body's doing that on its own. So right now I'm going to let my body do its own thing and kind of reassess where I am sometime in midsummer.
Well, you kind of just touched on something that hits pretty close to home for me when you talked about the 6-pack and saying, just doing it to see if you can. I think that to me has been one of the more enlightening thought processes, is just the see if I can kind of mentality. Whether it was the first marathon I ran, or even when I did a 6-day water fast, a lot of people would ask me, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And there was some other reasons outside of just to see if I can, but that was my primary reason. And a lot of them, like I have this obsession with pushing my limits and figuring out how far I can go. And, I used to have that limited mentality of thinking, I can't do this or I can't do that, or I'd be the person watching TV looking at all these athletes saying, oh, I wish I could do that. But it's changed to, what, let me give it a shot and see if I can. And it's something that I don't fear anymore, which I think is pretty incredible, which actually is a good leadway into my next question here. Something that I know both you and I are big advocates in are mental health. So I want you to actually kind of let me in a little bit on, as far as I know, you touched base with some issues in your past with your parents and moving out to Washington, but what role has physical fitness played as far as your overall mental health, how you viewed certain things and how you view yourself?
Awesome. Yeah. So I guess to begin, fitness gave me a mental health outlet for the emotions that I had, because I do believe emotions, I see emotions as somewhat metaphysical and somewhat actual physical. And I believe there's research for both, but I won't exactly get into that right now. But just the release for that frustration or that need for control over your own life. I think that's where fitness really started to come in for me, is like, okay, I might not control the circumstances around me right now, whether that's with school or with family or with whatever. But I can control this, and that gives me something to focus on, and it gives me an outlet for that energy that I believe every person has, that need for understanding I'm in control of this, and like I have somewhat of a say in my own destiny. And I think mentally that's so important, and I think a lot of people don't have that, and I believe sadly that a lot of mental health issues do eventually grow out of that. For example, I'm a very anxious person. I have very, very high anxiety, and I've realized over time, the more little things in my life, I feel like, okay, obviously there's chaos in life and there's no total control over that. But once with fitness, I learned like, okay, there's chaos, but I can ride the chaos. I can do this with chaos. I can react this way to this situation or that way to that situation. So I felt like it could handle the waves of life better. It really gave me more control over myself and my own emotions. I didn't feel overpowered by my emotions anymore. And, and obviously that's not like an overnight thing. You don't just snap your fingers and that resolution comes to you. It takes years, and that amount of time varies really for everyone. But that it's just being on the journey that's important. It's not necessarily that it's the destination, but it really gave me the understanding that I can ride the waves of life and be okay. And that just, it's such a simple statement, to be okay, but it's very underrated, in our culture, I think, because everyone doesn't focus on being okay. They focus on like, all right, I need to be at the top of this or be the best at this or be, and they start comparing themselves to each other. I'm like, you can just be okay and you can be happy with that. And that's okay if, and obviously you never necessarily want to be average, but it's hard to summarize. I don't necessarily think there is an average person, but and it's okay to want to be better and stuff like that. But I think we've taken the word average and weaponized it a little bit. Like, it's okay to be average at something because you're growing, because you're learning, and eventually you're going to be doing all this other crazy stuff. It's okay to have to summarize it, even though I don't like to use that word, it's okay to have an average bench press if you want to have a great one eventually, because you're on that journey and you're learning, and that's what matters. Mm-hmm. So, just that understanding that you can be okay with where you are right now, and that realization, I think is very powerful once you have it. And I think that gives you a lot more control over your own destiny to have that realization. Because, and I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase this, frustration, I think, is a big issue in society. People just are very frustrated. You can see it in the way they drive, actually. I think it's very interesting. The way people drive, everyone drives frustrated. And I heard this one time, it was totally unrelated to this too, but someone told me that frustration is simply feeling like there's something blocking what you want to do. And once and people have this frustration, like, oh, I can't go to the gym and I'm frustrated about that because I don't have this, like money is blocking me from doing, or time is blocking me from doing that. And it's like, once you're in the, either the fitness world or things like that, or on your own journey, and you can take away that power that something has to take something away from you and put yourself in control, that frustration dies down quite a bit and eventually just starts to fade away. But and I think that's been really important for my mental health. And also, obviously, there's circumstances you can't control in your life, and those will take a big effect on you. A couple of years ago, for example, I was the first person to show up on a DUI wreck, and I remember like pulling cars off of people, and it was a crazy experience, and it sat with me for a long time, and it definitely messed with me, and that affected my mental health. But when you have control over your own destiny, I think you have control over your mental health, in the sense that you might not be okay at that moment. Like, it took me a while to really process what happened and the things that I saw. But and I'm trying to think of the best way to explain it. I'm sorry, I'm not a very vocal person, so sometimes I struggle to vocalize the things that I'm thinking of. But once you're on that journey, that like, okay, I can see this for what it is, and I'm in control of these things, so I can allow this thing that happened to me, or this thing that I saw that has no reason, has no explanation right now, I can allow that to exist, and I can be okay right now with what it is, and explore, as time goes on, the results of what happened or the thoughts that I had because of this. And I can see where those take me, and those paths that I might not see right now. And it creates, and that's where fitness is. Like, like when I got hurt, I was just super upset, super devastated, because my injuries had drug out for so long. And not to pass any blame or anything, but it did turn out a lot. If I had gone to the right doctors ahead of time, I would have been probably better in like 2 months. So obviously I was pretty frustrated. I felt like they were in control of my physical destiny at that point. And then I was like, okay, obviously this isn't a one day thing. It took time, but I was like, all right, this happened. I'm upset about it. I'm going to let that be as it is. I'm going to be okay and in control of the things that I can. I'm going to allow these emotions to exist and explore them and see how I feel about them. And then over time, I'm going to look at the way my life's going. I'm going to look at that incident and see if there's knowledge or positivity I can pull out of that, and eventually take away the power of life's events over yourself.
That's awesome. That's some great insight there. And there's something I really hope that does resonate with anybody who does listen to this episode. Something that he said there towards the beginning about riding the chaos. This is something I find extremely important with working out, putting yourself through grueling exercise. I myself dealt with a lot of mental issues, anxiety. I was probably one of the worst people out there who would sweat the small things. If somebody cut me off on the road, I'd get upset and swear I'd let it ruin my day. Then I'd stub my toe in the morning. That would ruin my whole day. And I started noticing that when I would push myself through grueling workouts, especially now that I'm an early riser, when I would push myself to the point where I was almost dry heaving at the end of a workout, when these small stresses would come about during the day, it didn't mean much to me. I had the energy and the understanding to be able to deal with the bigger stresses when they came, but the smaller stresses really didn't do anything for me. And I think that's something very important for people to take away from this, that doing physical fitness, pushing your body like that, and being able to push yourself outside of your comfort zone, just from a mental standpoint, is going to make you so much stronger. You can handle a lot of these day-to-day stresses that usually build up a little bit over time, and then by the end of the day they just come to a bubble and it pops, and you get so frustrated, and it ruins your entire day. So I'm glad you said that there about riding the chaos, because I don't care if you make $500 billion and you have what looks like on the surface the perfect life. Everybody's dealing with suffering in some kind of way, shape, or form. There's never going to be a way around that. Every single human is going to endure suffering, but what we can do is perceive the suffering differently. And I think fitness really allows us the opportunity to be able to perceive that in a way that we can use it as an advantage to our own progression. So Mario, I appreciate that insight there. I think that was really great. Before we do get into our rapid fire questions here, as you know, we are Redcon One brothers. I'm curious to hear your story of how you got into Redcon products.
So to start, it actually came because I was interested in supplements from the beginning. As a teenager, I always just thought they were cool, honestly, is where it started. And I don't know if you remember like the Jack 3D and the C4 when that all came out. Yeah. And then, you start taking that as a teenager, and your body's resilient at that age. You can handle a lot of nonsense when you're 16, 17 years old. And as I got older, I was just like, I would take it and I would just feel like I was dying. I was like, okay, there's something to these supplements that I just don't understand. So I did some research, and I was like, okay, there's actually a science behind this. It's not just, the bro science that you see and all that on Instagram. But so I was like, all right, let's actually learn about what's in these. And naturally, when I started to learn about what was in supplements and what you needed, a lot of them started to fall by the wayside. I was like, all right, I'm not taking this. I'm not taking that. I don't need to take this. And again, finances were always a big role for me too. Cause I was like, some of this stuff is just insanely priced, when you look at the cost of bulk ingredients and all that. So, I think I want to say it was January of now, what would be 2 years ago. I found they were doing a sale. It was one of their bigger sales. I don't exactly remember what it was. I think they were giving out a t-shirt that Redcon One was giving out a t-shirt. And I was like, and I looked at their Total War, and I actually read the back, and I compared it to my notes about things like clinical dosing of like a big thing for me was like citrulline clinical dose, 6 grams. Okay. That's way more than a lot of these others are offering. And then, how much caffeine? Like, I want around 300 milligrams of caffeine, and that's what Total War had. Beta alanine, I want over 3 grams. Total War is 3.2. I was like, okay, like this is clinically dosed. The price is reasonable. I get a t-shirt. So I ordered it. Loved it. I was just like, all right, this is a good product. I really enjoy this. And I started using their product. So I started to branch out. I took, then I added Big Noise for a little bit when I needed it. And I really enjoyed the MRE Light, especially with the animal-based protein, and then the Green Beret, the vegan protein, I really enjoyed. And then I actually originally didn't know much about the tier operator program. I don't know why I didn't know. I just hadn't seen it up until that point. And then I found out about it, and I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. And I was playing around with it, and I started to actually like read what they do and stuff. I was like, this is a really cool idea. I like this. I want to be a part of that. So I applied, and I wasn't sure if I would get it or not when I first did it. But I was like, what's the harm? I applied. So I applied, and then I started to get to know everyone, and it really just spiraled into something that I really enjoyed and wanted to be a part of, because I felt like, okay, they're including people. I love that. The prices are reasonable. I love that. The gear is sick. Just for a superficial reason, I was like, I do love that. I like the message that they have about donations and helping people, with this all the veteran stuff that they did. And I'm spacing on the exact names right now. I'm sorry. But with the veteran stuff, I was like, I really like that. A lot of my good friends had been in Afghanistan and Iraq. And since I like that they do that and they care about those things. So it looked to me like more than a supplement company. And I think that's what I was looking to be a part of, and that's why I joined the program. And naturally I just fell in love with the program after that, because it was more than a supplement company. It's an idea that also sells supplements, and the supplements match those ideas, and I like that a lot. And the people I've met, it's just the networking that's been a part of it has been incredible. I mean, obviously I met you through it, which has been amazing, and just so many awesome people I've met, and the opportunities that have come from it have been just well beyond what I originally expected.
Yeah, I can really echo a lot of those same sentiments, and it's almost as if they've created a movement completely outside of the supplements themselves. You know, the amount of people that are involved and the amount of good people, what they're trying to do is just absolutely incredible. And I think the big thing for me that really turned me onto the supplements originally is, you know, I kind of did the same thing where I was trying to figure out, you know, let's look at this from a more scientific standpoint. Let's see what doses are good for you in certain ingredients. And, you know, every single other supplement company, I was seeing videos of somebody saying, here, take this. It has everything you need. And I'm sitting there going, well, how do you know it has everything I need? I'm different than person A, B, C, D, E, and F. You know, we all do it differently. And Redcon never really preached that message. They preached transparency, which was, hey, here's our lab results. So if it's not on the label, it's not in the product. And then they also preached, here, we looked at science and we used the most efficacious dosing. And that's what really originally turned me on to them. And then, yeah, just trying all of the products. The taste of the products are incredible. I've probably had maybe at least 40 pounds of S'mores MRE Light since that product came out, because it's my absolute favorite. But yeah, they've just done such an incredible job building a community, building a brand, and building a movement with people. And that's where I've met a lot of great people, and I'm glad to be repping their products and to continue to buy. Although, you know, my bank account does hurt every time there's a free t-shirt, because I jump up like a little kid and said, ooh, free t-shirt, I might as well buy.
Absolutely, yeah.
Wow. All right, Mario. Well, I do appreciate you doing this interview with me. What we're going to do here, before we get into the 10-question rapid fire, go ahead and let people know, where can they find you? Are you on social media platforms, and how would they be able to follow you?
Yeah, so I'll be honest, all I really use is Instagram. I do have a Facebook. I really don't go on it too much. But yeah, Instagram, you can find me at Big Lifts, which BIGLIFTS _ Bigger Heart, BIGGERHEARTS. Big Lifts, Bigger Heart's my Instagram, and I'm on there quite a bit. I'm sure you can attest to that. You see how much I'm on there. But I'm open to talk to anyone, really. Like, I post just everything that I'm interested in and whatever I'm doing that day. I can be honest, there's not a huge plan in what I do. It's just simply just existing and seeing where it takes me. But I love talking to people on there. I probably talk to 10 new people a week through Instagram. So yeah, if you want to follow me, message me. That would be incredible. I'd love to get to know you. If you're listening to this, I'm sure we have quite a few things in common. So that's going to be the best place to find me.
Amazing. All right, Mario, let's go ahead and jump into this 10-question rapid fire. Again, it's either going to be a this or that, or just give me a 2 or 3 word response based on the question, okay?
Yep, sounds good.
All right, so number 1, card games or board games?
Board games.
Books or ebooks?
Ebooks.
Ninjas or samurais?
Oof. Ninjas.
Waffles or pancakes?
Waffles.
Couch or recliner?
Recliner.
What is your biggest pet peeve?
My biggest pet peeve. I would say my biggest pet peeve is probably going to be apathy.
I like that. What is the best advice somebody has given you?
The best advice someone's ever given me is probably, I'm not going to be able to quote it word for word, but it's going to be to look behind the curtain.
And what is the worst piece of advice someone gave you?
The worst piece of advice someone ever gave me was probably to just accept how things are. Like, it is the way it is. If I ever hear that, I'll probably just stop the conversation as it is.
That's taking the words out of my mouth there. That's the one line I hear, and I cringe when I hear that.
Yeah.
All right, 2 more here. What is one guilty pleasure that you have?
Guilty pleasure is probably midday naps.
And the last one here, I'm going to assume since you are a bit into Strongman, I don't know if you've been paying any attention to the beef between Thor and Eddie Hall.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I've seen that.
Okay, so your pick for the boxing match, who wins, Eddie Hall or Thor?
I'll give you 2 answers on that. If they both come out without serious brain damage, I'll say they both won. But I think Eddie's stronger, but he's going to have trouble punching. He's going to have trouble getting in range of Thor because Thor's arms are just so long. So I'm going to give the advantage to Thor, but I think it's pretty close to 50-50.
Yeah, I'm actually really excited to see that myself. I look at the reach advantage for Thor, but I think, for me personally, I think Eddie Hall has this innate ability to go somewhere very, very dark, and I can see him knocking Thor out there, but it's going to be one for the history books, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's going to be quite I've never bought a pay-per-view experience in my life, and I can say this might be the first one that makes me do it.
All right, Mario. Hey, I really appreciate you joining me today. Everyone, make sure you go follow him on Instagram. Again, that's biglifts_biggerheart. Mario Folino, thank you so much for being on my podcast today.
Of course. And if you don't mind me add one thing, I'm sorry I didn't bring this up. If anyone looks me up by my actual name, Mario Folino, they're not going to find me. My Instagram is just Big Lifts, Bigger Heart. My actual name is not tied to the account. I don't want anyone to get confused on that.
Okay. All right. You heard him, ladies and gentlemen. Again, Mario, thank you so much.
Thanks. You have a great day.
You as well, Mario. Take care. Thank you so much to everybody who tuned in. I hope you enjoyed Mario's story as well as our conversation. As always, at the end of these episodes, I do like to leave with a Bible verse that's applicable with what the discussion was that day. And today I'd like to take from Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. You see, you've got to understand that sometimes life is going to throw things your way. There's going to be obstacles in your path, but you need to look inward. You need to listen to that voice inside of you that's telling you what you need to do. You need to listen to that voice that's pulling you to a higher cause, to a higher purpose, and to serve something bigger than yourself. Many blessings to each and every one of you out there. I hope you have a beautiful week ahead of you, and I can't wait till we meet again.